the fundamental conclusion that 2011 was, I think, a clear turning point.
We're leaving this now to take you back live to the U.S. House of Representatives. They have returned from their recess.
And nays. Proceedings on H.R. 1815 and H.R. 2453 will resume later in the week. The first electronic vote will be conducted as a 15-minute vote. The remaining electronic vote will be conducted as a 5-minute vote. The unfinished business is the vote on the motion from the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Lukemire, to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 3001, on which the yeas and nays are ordered. The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 3001, a bill to award a Congressional Gold Medal to Raoul Wallenberg in recognition of his achievements and heroic actions during the Holocaust.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill? Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 15-minute vote.
So this is the first of two bills awarding congressional gold medals this evening. This one awarded to Raoul Wallenberg, the Swedish humanitarian and businessman who rescued thousands of Jews in Hungary during the Nazi Holocaust. Later in the week, the House is expected to take up highway and mass transit legislation and a bill called the Small Business Tax Cut Act. Right now, the Senate is taking a procedural vote to move the so-called Buffett Rule proposal ahead, which would set a minimum effective tax rate for high-income earners. That proposal would require people who earn $1 million a year to pay at least 30% in federal income taxes. It's named after billionaire investor Warren Buffett, who has called for higher taxes on the rich. And another update, the Senate right now is taking a procedural vote to move forward with the so-called Buffett Rule proposal, which would set a minimum effective tax rate for high-income earners. Following the killing of Florida teenager Trayvon Martin, the Senate Judiciary Subcommittee will hold hearings on racial profiling tomorrow and will have live coverage at 10 a.m. Eastern on C-SPAN 3. Actor Alec Baldwin was in Washington today, pressing for increased federal funding for the arts after government dollars were cut last year. And we'll have his remarks tonight at 11:30 Eastern. That's on C-SPAN 2. Also, the former head of the General Services Administration apologized for a 4-day Las Vegas area conference in 2010 that cost taxpayers over $800,000. Martha Johnson resigned after the GSA Inspector General released a report on that conference. The House Oversight Committee, which is chaired by Congressman Darrell Issa, questioned GSA officials over the wasteful spending today.
On this vote, the yeas are 377, the noes are 0. Two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended. The bill is passed, and without objection, a motion to reconsider is laid on the table. The unfinished business is the vote on the motion for the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Lukemire, to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 4040, on which the yeas and nays are ordered. The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 4040, a bill to provide for the award of a gold medal on behalf of Congress to Jack Nicklaus in recognition of his service to the nation in promoting excellence and good sportsmanship in golf.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill? Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 5-minute vote.
So this last vote this evening, a Congressional Gold Medal to be awarded to 72-year-old professional golfer Jack Nicklaus. Nicknamed the Golden Bear, Nicklaus won a total of 18 career major championships. He currently resides in Palm Beach, Florida. This bill is brought up under special rules, no amendments, limited debate, and a two-thirds majority vote needed to pass. Over in the Senate, members are still voting on a procedural vote to move forward with the so-called Buffett rule proposal, which would set a minimum effective tax rate for high-income earners. Specifically, that proposal would require people who earn $1 million a year to pay at least 30% in federal income taxes. It's named after billionaire investor Warren Buffett, who has advocated for a while for higher taxes on the rich.
On this vote, the yeas are 373, the nays are 4, with 1 recorded as present. 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, motion to reconsider is laid on the table.
The House will be in order. Pursuant to House Resolution 571, in the order of the House of March 6, 2012, the Speaker on March 14, 2012, appointed the following members of the House to the committee to attend the funeral of the late Honorable Donald M. Payne.
The gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Smith. The gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Clyburn. The members of the New Jersey delegation, Mr. Pallone, Mr. Andrews, Mr. Peelinghuisen, Mr. Lobiando, Mr. Pasquarel, Mr. Rothman, Mr. Holt, Mr. Garrett, Mr. Series, Mr. Lance, and Mr. Runyon. Other members in attendance, Ms. Capter, Mr. Levin, Mr. Towns, Ms. Waters, Ms. Corinne Brown of Florida, Mr. Rush, Mr. Scott of Virginia, Mr. Watt, Ms. Woolsey, Ms. Jackson Lee of Texas, Mr. Jackson of Illinois, Mr. Clay, Mr. Butterfield, Mr. Cleaver, Mr. Al Green of Texas, Ms. Moore, Ms. Clark of New York, Mr. Johnson of Georgia, Ms. Edwards, Ms. Fudge, Ms. Bass of California, Ms. Sewell, Ms. Norton, and Mrs. Christensen.
The House will be in order. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from North Carolina rise?
Mr. Speaker, I send to the desk a privilege report from the Committee on Rules for filing under the rule.
The clerk will report the title.
Report to accompany House Resolution 614, resolution providing for consideration of the bill H.R. 4089 to protect and enhance opportunities for recreational hunting, fishing, and shooting, and for other purposes.
Referred to the House calendar in order printed. The House will be in order. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from North Carolina seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker.
Objection. The gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute. The gentleman is correct. The House is not in order. The members of the House will clear the well. The members are requested to please take the conversations off the floor. The House will be in order. The gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to congratulate an outstanding young man from Deep Gap, North Carolina. Kyle Stockamp is set to graduate from the United States Air Force Academy this May. He will be graduating as squadron commander of his unit and was recently selected to represent the Air Force Academy at the Doolittle Raider reunion. He was selected as the #1 cadet from all of the history and FAS history majors to serve on the Silver Goblet detail at this historic event. Kyle was first nominated for the Air Force Academy in 2006. In 2007, he left the Academy to spend time as a missionary in Taiwan and subsequently returned to the Academy. Today, I am proud not only to congratulate Kyle for graduating at the top of his class, but proud of his dedication and commitment to God and his country. May God continue to bless Kyle and his family. I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, as the sun rose in the hill country shortly before 8 a.m., she breathed her first breath of life. She weighed 6 pounds, 12 ounces, and was 19.5 inches long as she arrived in Round Rock, Texas on April 12th of this year. Presley Poe is the 4th child born to Susie and Kurt Poe. I call Presley number 10 since I refer to each of our grandchildren not only by name but by birth number as well. Anyway, Presley, like all of us, did not choose her family or her place of birth. But she is blessed to be born to a God-fearing family and in a nation like no other. There's something about little girls that makes us smile. Maybe it's their happy spirit. Or is it that little glow of angelic quality with a speck of mischief? Or maybe it is we see in their eyes a hope for a better and gentler world. It's all of these, of course. So welcome to the world, Presley. And as your grandfather, I hope you walk in the path of goodness, giving, and gratitude, and that you attend the University of Texas and not Texas A&M. And that's just the way it is.
Members are reminded to address their remarks to the chair. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
To address the House for 1 minute and amend my remarks as may be necessary.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Occasionally we go to remarkable events, and I did so last Saturday. A couple that had reached the age of 94 and 92 were celebrating not only the gentle lady's birthday, but also their 70th year of marriage. And when I told people where I had been, they go, You got to be kidding. 70 years? No, they were not married as teenagers, but they were married in their 20s. They happen to be my aunt and uncle, and I love those genes. So congratulations to Ann and Jack Murphy on the birthday of Ann's 90th birthday and their 70th anniversary.
Yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Minnesota seek recognition?
Address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Tomorrow is tax day, and as Americans work to file their taxes by midnight tomorrow, they are reminded about how broken our tax code and our tax system really is, how burdensome it has become, how complicated it has become, and how it has not kept up with today's economy. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, there are too many in Washington that always believe the answer is only to raise taxes rather than focusing on tax reform. Just a few weeks ago, the United States became the #1 country in the world, the developed world, for having the highest corporate tax rate. This is something we should not be aspiring to. A new medical device tax is set to start next January that will be a hard-hitting tax on the American success story of medical innovation. Mr. Speaker, we need a tax code that promotes hard work, achievement, innovation, and also savings and investment. Mr. Speaker, we need a tax code that is simpler and fair and more competitive for all taxpayers so we can grow our economy and create jobs. And I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Texas seek recognition? Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I was in Colombia, South America, this past week with the President for what was an outstanding discussion among 30 presidents, including the President of the United States. And the meeting reinforced our commitment to South America and Central America on business opportunities, small business opportunities, human rights, the controlling of drug trafficking. But at the same time, we had to, in essence, listen and hear about a horrible action that occurred by members of the Secret Service. This does not undermine the Secret Service long years of service for 147 years, but there must be accountability. I do not think that we should cede any authority to the House Oversight Committee. This is a question of homeland security and national security, and we must begin to act immediately for a full investigation. Finally, on the General Services Administration, it should be cleaned up and cleaned out. I know for a fact, because monies that are being spent on the Mickey Leland Federal Building, the contractor is Gilbane. They are adhering to no rules regarding small business, minority-owned business, diversity and workforce, nothing at all, overseen by the General Services Administration, who's done absolutely nothing to rail in companies like Gilbane that have done nothing as it relates to diversity, small business, and doing anything to adhere to the American values that everybody must have an opportunity under federal funding. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. GSA, clean up your act. I yield back.
The gentlelady's time has expired. Are there any other requests for 1-minute speeches? Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5, 2011, the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Burton, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks. Mr. Speaker, this past break that we were just on, I had occasion to visit a great friend and ally in the Persian Gulf area. And if we ever needed allies in that area because of Iran, we sure need them right now. And I'm talking about the country of Bahrain. Bahrain is a great friend not only because they've been historically a friend of the United States, but we have the 5th Fleet there. And the 5th Fleet is there to protect the interests of that part of the world as well as the United States of America. The Straits of Hormuz and the Persian Gulf is right there, and the 5th Fleet is there to guarantee that shipping of oil from that part of the world can get through. And so Bahrain is extremely important to the United States as well as being a friend and an ally. In addition to that, Bahrain is also a free trade agreement partner. We have a great free trade agreement with them, and they've been absolutely great as far as trade is concerned. I think we have a trade surplus with them. Now, the reason I brought this up tonight, Mr. Speaker, is because I watch television and I've seen where there's been a repressive government in Bahrain. Now, there's no question there's been problems in the past. There has been overreaction by the police in certain instances in the past year and a half. And as a result, there were people who were hurt severely when they were demonstrating in the streets of Bahrain. But the king and the crown prince have worked very hard to solve this problem. One of the problems they have over there is the Iranian government is working to try to undermine the governments of many of the countries in the Persian Gulf, and Bahrain is one of them. And there have been people coming from Iran into Bahrain to try to work with the demonstrators to undermine that government and overthrow it. And people from Bahrain who are fairly radical have gone to Iran and Iraq to learn tactics to employ against the government there. And we have found that just recently there has been firebombing of homes of police. There have been firebombings of police in the streets. Some of them have burned to death. And just recently, one of the homes there of a policeman, when he was gone, his wife and child was there, and their house was firebombed. Now, the police have been ordered by the government, the king and the crown prince, to be very careful on how they react to the demonstrators. As a matter of fact, they don't use ammunition. They use tear gas to control the crowds. So there's no attempt right now to hurt the people there who are trying to hurt the police and the government. And so I think it's important that we get the proper perspective on what's going on over there, because this is one country that's extremely important to the United States because of energy that we get, as well as trade and other things. If the Straits of Hormuz were to be closed down, if the Gulf, the Persian Gulf was closed down, if they sunk some ships in there, or if they put mines in the Straits of Hormuz or the Persian Gulf, the Fifth Fleet would have to go in and clean those out to make sure that commerce continued through the Persian Gulf and the Straits of Hormuz. So Bahrain is extremely important. Now, I want to make a couple points tonight that's extremely important. First of all, the government and the police have made mistakes in the past. There's no question about that. Demonstrators, as I said before, have been infiltrated by outside radical elements. And the demonstrators have used terrorist tactics, as I said, to try to destroy and undermine the government, and the Molotov cocktails is one of the things that they've been using. But they've been learning other things from the radical elements that come in there or have been trained by the Iranians. Now, the government has attempted to solve the problems. As a matter of fact, the king appointed an outside commission, and this is the commission report, Mr. Speaker. This is a huge report. And it's not by the government of Bahrain. It's by an outside group of people who are being fair and objective when they made these recommendations to the government. And the king and the crown prince and the government are doing everything they can to implement these recommendations. And we need to applaud them for doing that. They're reaching out to the demonstrators and the more radical elements to try to get them to the conference table to solve these problems. And so far, the demonstrators, supported in large part by these radical elements, will not come to the conference table and discuss these issues. And so the government is trying to reach out to them, but the demonstrators don't want to. And that's something that I think the world needs to know and the people in this country need to know. And I hope our State Department is paying attention to this, because the State Department has a different view in many respects than what I found when I was there. I want to stress very, very clearly tonight that the government has reached out to the demonstrators to discuss their grievances, but they can't get them to sit down with them. So the government's reaching out, but the radical elements in the demonstrations are trying to make sure that the government continues to be undermined and stopped. Let me just end up by saying that we don't have a lot of friends in that part of the world. We've seen all kinds of problems in Libya. Libya is now in a state of confusion. If you look at Egypt right now, radical elements are trying to take over the government of Egypt, and that's the biggest country in that area. We see the problems in Syria. People are being killed, and we're trying to see a resolution of that problem through the mitigation of the United Nations and the former head of the United Nations. But that area that entire area is in a state of flux, and we need all the friends that we can get. And one of the best friends we have in the world, in my opinion, is Bahrain. And since they are our friend, and the Fifth Fleet is there, And since they are a great trading partner, I think that we should make sure that the American people and the rest of the world knows how important Bahrain is to this country and to the world. 40%, 35 to 40% of our energy comes through the Persian Gulf and the Straits of Hormuz. If that area were to be bottled up, we would be in big trouble. Lights would go off, energy would be curtailed, we'd have electricity curtailed, and it would be bad for industry and the commerce of this country. And so the Fifth Fleet being there is extremely important. And Bahrain has been very supportive of our military, very supportive of our intelligence, very supportive of the Navy and the Fifth Fleet, and we need to make sure that that relationship continues for as many years as possible. And the best way to do that is to make sure there's stability in the government. And the information that's been coming back through the State Department and others is that the government of Bahrain has been repressive and that we ought to be putting pressure on them to make positive changes. They have made the changes. They are using tear gas only to stop the demonstrators. They reached out to the demonstrators to get them to the conference table, to support and change rules and regulations and laws there that will solve the problem. This, again, is a report, an independent report by outside entities, experts, that came up with a very voluminous report on things that should be changed in Bahrain by the royal family and the government to make sure that everybody can live together in peace and there'll be stability in the region. And I want to stress one more time, the demonstrators will not come to the conference table. So tonight I'd like to urge those who are demonstrating to take a step back, take a deep breath, and reach out and take the hand of the government, sit down at the conference table and work things out, because that's what they want to do. And if they do that, I'm sure there'll be peace and harmony in Bahrain, and it'll be great for the United States of America, because a great friend, a great ally, and a great government over there will be secure and be able to protect our interests as well as other interests that are very important to the entire world. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. For the House, the following personal requests.
Leaves of absence requested for Mr. Culberson of Texas for today, Ms. Edwards of Maryland for today, Mr. Jones of North Carolina for today, Mrs. Napolitano of California for today and tomorrow, Mr. Schiff of California for today.
Without objection, the requests are granted. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5, 2011, the gentlewoman from the Virgin Islands, Ms. Christensen, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And, Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material on the topic of this special order.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'd like to again thank the Democratic leader for giving us this time. Mr. Speaker, tonight, excuse me, the Congressional Black Caucus will use the hour to speak on to something that's always at the core of what we fight for and what we legislate for, and what we legislate to end, and which is always at the root of much of what we come to the floor every Monday night to talk about: the persistence of inequality and injustice in our country. And it is fitting, then, that as we do so this evening, we call to mind and honor a staunch champion for justice, Attorney John Payton, who at the time of his death on March 22nd was the 6th president of the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund. And tonight I am joined by several of my colleagues, and I'd like to begin by yielding such time as she might consume to the Congresswoman from Oakland, California, the former chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, a leader and one of our strongest fighters for justice and equality in this country, Congresswoman Barbara Lee.
Thank you very much. First, let me thank Congresswoman Dr. Christensen for those very kind remarks, but also for your leadership on this issue and on so many issues, and for anchoring these special orders week after week. It is so important that the points of views of the Congressional Black Caucus get out to the public, and you've been such a steady and consistent voice, and your presence here is deeply appreciated. Thank you very much. And also, I just have to thank all of the members of the Congressional Black Caucus, Chairman Cleaver, for continuing to beat the drum for justice. This past week, we lost a tireless advocate for justice, equality, and opportunity. And I am deeply saddened by the passing of my friend and activist, John Payton. John was a civil rights attorney and served as the president of the NAACP's Legal Defense and Educational Fund and was lead counsel for the University of Michigan in the 2003 landmark case concerning diversity in higher education. John was a California native, yet his legal victories touched those around the globe. At the center of his conviction was a belief that democracy, at its core, requires that all of the people be included in we the people. His life was really a testimony to this belief. He was the past president of the District of Columbia's Bar Association and served in leadership roles with a number of civil and human rights organizations, including the National Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under the Law and the Free South Africa Movement. And I was very privileged to be with John last year and his wife, my friend Gay McDougall, in Geneva, Switzerland, as we worked through, and I chaired a committee for the UN on minority political participation. John will be deeply missed by so many. My thoughts and my prayers are with his wife, Gay McDougall, and all of his family and his friends. And as we remember John and the progress that we've made with his leadership, we know that the work for justice is far from over. The recent events in Florida are really a grim reminder of the long road ahead. On February 26, 2012, Trayvon Martin, a 17-year-old African-American youth, was tragically gunned down while walking home from a local 7-Eleven store. The gunman, 38-year-old George Zimmerman, was not immediately charged for the murder and was released by Sanford Police Department. Sanford Police Chief Bill Lee said that there was not enough evidence to arrest George Zimmerman, even though the killer followed the young male in his SUV and confronted the teen before the shooting. More than 40 days later, as a result of the outrage across the country, dedicated reporting from the media, advocacy from community and faith leaders and vocal parents and families, and of course the facts which spoke for themselves, the wheels of justice are finally beginning to turn. This is really an unfortunate and tragic defining moment that we must come to grips with. And first we must, of course, seek justice for Trayvon and his family, especially in the wake of the circumstances surrounding his killing. Secondly, we must make certain that this toxic and deadly mix of the power of guns, hate crimes, and racial profiling ends once and for all. Just recently, Bill Cosby said that there is a need to get guns off the street and the people should be taught to use every possible alternative before shooting someone. Yet, of course, there are those who continue to push for vigilante justice with laws like Stand Your Ground. Sanford really could be anywhere. It could be in my own community, and we have many, many of the same challenges as Sanford has. Racial profiling is real. This young teenager was gunned down, of course, because of how he looked, because of the color of his skin. As a mother of 2 sons and the proud grandmother of 2 grandsons, these fears haunted me as I was raising my 2 sons and continue to haunt me each and every day. The reality is that many black parents live with these fears each and every day. Again, Sanford could be anywhere. Hate crimes must be reinforced. Of course, Mr. Zimmerman was fixated and focused on young black males, according to neighbors and press reports. He had been the subject of complaints by neighbors in his gated community for aggressive tactics. Now, our laws state that you cannot injure or intimidate another based on their race. When these laws are broken, the consequences must be applied appropriately. Whether it has been the color of one's skin, their religion, their gender, their disability, national origin, or sexual orientation or identity, the sad fact is that too many persons have been the victims of violence, often ending in death, simply because of a characteristic of birth. This senseless violence must end. Sanford could be anywhere. So very many people feel the loss of Trayvon as their own personal loss. And while we cannot understand and feel the pain experienced by Trayvon's family, there is universal pain. a national pain, and it is shared far and wide. And so we will continue to take up the very critical issues of racial profiling and hate crimes. A recent briefing on these issues successfully raised the level of awareness around the country about the deadly combination of guns, racial profiling, and hate crimes. Chairman Cleaver called upon the Department of Justice to investigate the shooting death of Trayvon Martin as a hate crime. On March 19th, the Department of Justice launched a full investigation, and of course, the Congressional Black Caucus is very eager to see this report. As President Obama said, this is a time of soul-searching for our nation as it comes to grips with this tragedy. This senseless violence must end, and so we all must recommit ourselves to justice, justice for all. Thank you, Congresswoman Christensen, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Congresswoman Lee. And you reminded me that I had the honor of traveling with you to Geneva for that conference, that UN conference that focused on the inequalities, the injustice that exists in far too many areas of the world with respect to voter participation. And as we heard from so many marginalized communities in different countries, it was really sad that when it came from my time to speak, that I spoke from the experience of the United States and the lack of voter participation, the lack of full representation of the District of Columbia, the capital of the United States, and the inability of the people of the territories to vote for the President, our Commander-in-Chief.
That's right, and I just want to respond. Will you yield for just a minute, Congresswoman Christensen? It was really a very important moment, I think, and we were again with our great fallen hero, John Payton, when we had this discussion about the disenfranchisement of individuals, the entire population of the District of Columbia, and he was totally dedicated to voting rights for the District of Columbia, and I'm so pleased that Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton is continuing to fight the good fight and has made sure that all of us do not forget that we live here, you know, during the week, and that we also have a real commitment to ensure that there are full voting rights for residents of the District of Columbia. They pay taxes, they have the full responsibilities and duties of American citizens, and they should be able to vote. And John Payton stood for that throughout his life. Thank you.
Thank you for adding that. And before I yield to the Congresswoman from the District of Columbia, I'd like to yield such time as she might consume to the gentlelady from Texas, also a very strong voice for justice.